Let us now continue. It is my pleasure to welcome General van Antwerp. I briefed him on where our discussion has got to. General, you have the microphone.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak up here so I can see you better. All Holiness, Eminences, just friends of the water industry in the world. It's just a delight to be with all of you here today. The first thing I do when I come somewhere is I drink some of the water. It's a test to see if what's the quality and quantity of the water. I want to just first start out by saying that I once heard a story about Julius Caesar, and a lot of you know who Julius Caesar was, but it has to do with generalship. One of my nieces came and visited me once when I was in the Pentagon back in Washington, D.C., and she wanted a tour, so I began to take her on this tour, and she stopped at a picture of a very, very old general. And she turned and looked up at me. She was about 8 years old at the time and said, "Uncle Van, I had to do a report on a general." So I asked her to tell me about the report, and she said, "Well, first of all, he was old, just like you, Uncle Van." So, and her second point was that he was a general, like you, Uncle Van, and I didn't know that Caesar was a general, but now I learned that. Her third point was he used to give long speeches. And so I knew I was about to get schooled. Her fourth point was, and they killed him. So I am going to keep this fairly brief, and I know we're going to take questions, and again, it's just a delight for me to be with you here today. In the Army, and obviously I'm in the Army and I'm dressed this way because this is our battle dress uniform, and if you would go into a theater in Iraq or Afghanistan, this is what our soldiers wear. We think that this era that we're in right now, in a couple of words, we're categorizing it as an era of consistent conflict and persistent conflict. Both of those meaning frequent, and then that when we think about persistence, staying power, that's the type of conflict we're in. And I want to put my remarks in that context. First of all, I've just got three things. There's probably many things that contribute to this notion of persistent conflict, but I'd like to just name three of them. One is population and population growth. And I'm going to put this in the context of water primarily. The first thing, if you think about population growth, I'll go back to something that's happening right here in the United States that the Corps of Engineers is dealing with, and this is with the three states of Alabama, Florida, and Georgia, that the headwaters are in one state, the state of Georgia, and that there are two rivers. They're just known by letters, ACT and ACF. For those of you that know, all those have meanings, and I won't repeat that for you today. But those rivers go down through Alabama and Florida. So you have the headwaters in one state, and then you have the river systems running to other states. And there's all kinds of interests. There's power generation and hydropower. There's a nuclear power plant that needs water from the river for cooling. There's a lot of industry on those rivers that need the navigation. They need certain depths. They need certain amounts of water to pass by so that they can load their barges to certain depths to move this great quantity of materials up and down the river. And then there's also environmental concerns, because down in Florida, for instance, there's mussels down there, and it's one of our great producers of mussels that are shipped all over the country. And as that water level rises or falls, it has to do with the population of those mussels. They're a threatened and endangered species. And then you, of course, if you don't have as much water flowing out into the Gulf, out through Florida, you get what we call saltwater intrusion. And a lot of you are more familiar than I as to the effects of that, but it changes the dynamic of a freshwater river to a brackish water and then to a salt water. So all these things are considerations. And so we're finding the driver of a lot of this, the amount of water that's taken off of the big reservoir up in Georgia is due to population growth. The population growth of Georgia, Atlanta to be specific. So that's one of the creators of instability, if you would, and the same thing in the world. I just met with a team from Brazil, and we talked about the Amazon, the mighty Amazon. And we talked about its worldwide significance to the environment and also to the navigation industry and to water quality and quantity in all of South America. One of the other things that we're seeing as a trend that contributes, and it has to do with this population, is where's the population living? We even see this as we're in Afghanistan and Iraq today. The population is being displaced from the countryside, if you will, and now moving into more of urban settings. And that creates all kinds of challenges. It creates challenge with waste removal. I was walking down the streets of New Orleans last night and just noticed everyone was putting their trash out. The trash pickup must be real early in the morning on Friday morning. And you just see the volume of that that's generated in an urban environment. Well, in addition, you have water supply, water quality, and all the other things that go with that urban development. And of course, one of the other things in there is what is the government's ability to meet those challenges? As you have this incredible population growth, does the government and its capabilities grow to that same extent? We've got a couple of places. I'll mention Los Angeles because I lived there for a couple of years. It is an incredible, sprawling metropolis. And it's got the big city right downtown Los Angeles, but then it has many, many developments that go out from there. Water is a factor. Water is a factor in development. And more it will play. And because of that, it creates tensions. And it creates worldwide tensions. I know you've talked about climate change and other things. I'd just like to say, as we talk about this persistent conflict, I think one of the big drivers is this climate change, and I will add to that natural disasters. I was on a panel, a UN panel that was a high-level panel on water and disasters. We presented our report in Istanbul this year. It was a phenomenal conference. Some things, without going into what's in the report, I tell you, we came to the conclusion that we need to do much better planning on a worldwide scale. And we had to plan about what would our response be? What would the early warning be? What would be the evacuation plans? What would be those measures that an individual can take, that a locality could take, that a state could take, that a government could take? And then we talked about the rebuilding part. And the rebuilding part is crucial. Right here in New Orleans, and I know you've heard about Katrina recovery and from Jerry and other folks, one of the things that happened right away was the President of the United States came down here and said, we're going to rebuild. And then a mark was put on the wall. And that mark was by hurricane season 2011. So that's the mark on the wall. And we're moving towards that, but $15 billion will be spent to get to what many people in the world would say is really just a minor risk reduction measure. That's a 100-year risk reduction. So we've got to look at that too. I went and talked to my counterparts over kind of where my name is, my Dutch counterparts, and they have some of their dikes that are 10,000 year. And so where do we go, and is it financially feasible to even do that? One of the things that I think about when I think about this risk and natural disaster, well, first of all, you don't know where it's going to strike next. And so you have to prepare very broadly on this. One of the things we're using in more and more is we're looking at non-structural measures. These are hard. To relocate a small town where people grew up and that their life's blood is there, and now saying the non-structural solution is to move them to higher ground rather than to build a protection levee or a risk reduction levee. These are really tough decisions. And the final area in the persistent conflict is really what I see happening all over the world, and this is an increased demand on resources. Energy resources. One of the things we're dealing with in this country that involves the Corps of Engineers is mountaintop mining. It's where we get a lot of our coal. And what happens when you take the top off of a mountain and harvest the coal there is there's tailings from that mining process. And if those tailings get into your water courses, they create additional challenges, and in many cases, environmental problems. So as we look at that, we know that we've got to be constantly aware of what this increased need for energy is doing to us. You could talk about gas, and you could talk about hydropower. The Corps of Engineers provides about 24% of the hydropower for this nation. We're very proud of that. If you went to one of our hydropower plants, if you went to one of our dams that had the big turbines in it, and you went and looked at an individual turbine, you'll see that most of them were built and made in the 50s and 60s. So you see what the American Society of Civil Engineers would say, a backlog of about $2.2 trillion to totally rework and have everything back up to what we would say is a great standard. We've done the same thing for our dams. The Corps of Engineers has 928 harbors and 610 dams that we oversee. Some of those are dams right today. We have the water levels in those dams are taken down way low to take the pressure off of that dam, while we do cut-off walls and other solutions to make that dam and bring that dam back up to a great condition. And then, of course, food. That's a big issue. One of the things we're doing in Afghanistan right today, we have a team that's over there, and they're going into every province in Afghanistan to try and determine what's the water resource solution for that province. Is it more wells? But one of the things we're finding, most of what you have over there right now are wells, and they've gone into the upper aquifer, and that aquifer is being depleted, and now into deeper and deeper aquifers. And some of those deeper aquifers are being contaminated as they punch through those upper aquifers. And what is the long-term solution? Is it dams and reservoirs, more pumping out of aquifers, or kind of a combination of both? But we're trying to help them come to those solutions, because ultimately we think they're going to have an agricultural-based society that's going to allow them to import-export. But in the meantime, there's great tension there, because where's the food come from? How can they pay for it? And all of those things. And then, of course, there's water. I think that I talked to some people from Africa when I was at Istanbul for the conference, and they said, "General, you know that water is like gold to us. Other people here talk about oil and food, but the water is like gold." So that's an incredible perspective, and really tells where a lot of our energy has to be. Let me just close with just a couple of comments about the Mississippi, the mighty Mississippi here. The Mississippi, General Walsh was here, and one of the other names we have for his division is the Long Skinny Division, because it goes all the way from Canada, and maybe he used those terms, all the way down to throughout the Gulf here. Basically, the Corps of Engineers is organized on watersheds. And so the Mississippi Valley Division has the entire, really the main stem of the Mississippi. But there's a number of other rivers that feed into the Mississippi. When we had floods in the Midwest last year, one of my engineers did a little calculation on the back of an envelope. If all the water that did damage went outside of agricultural levees or got into storm drains and flooded streets and things, if all of that water would have been contained and then passed into the Mississippi River, how high do you think the water would be at St. Louis? So he started to do that calculation. By the way, if you go to the big arch in St. Louis, you're actually standing on a levee. It's a grassy hillside, and it goes down, and there's a road down there, and then it goes down further. But that's a levee. It's 62 feet high. The calculation came out, if all that water was contained from the Midwest floods that got in through all that river system into the Mississippi, that the water would have been over 100 feet high at St. Louis. We're not about to build a 100-foot levee at St. Louis. So how do we do this? How do we provide protection and risk reduction at the same time? Really enable this water course to, in many instances, do what it will naturally do. We've tried to redirect water courses. In the end, it's going to do what it's going to do. Katrina recovery. I've already told you that we have a deadline for this, but I'll also say that 100-year, if Katrina hit again today, well, first of all, it was a 200-year event, which and had a surge with it that was much greater than a 200-year event. So even today, even in June of 2011, when we finish this, what I will say is probably the first part of this, to get it to 100-year protection, there would have been a lot of people if Katrina hits again. One of the things that we're putting our mark on is that we won't have a levee failure or a levee wall failure, but there's still going to be a lot of people that will be inundated, because a storm over that 100-year means that there'll be flooding, and could be pretty severe flooding. The other part down here that we learned, and you've probably heard a little bit about, the actual risk reduction system down here was started way back in the 1960s, and it still really wasn't completed when Katrina hit. So we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about projects versus systems, where you have the Katrina work down here is 350 contracts, if you want to think about it in that, 350 separate projects. But if those projects don't link together, if we don't look where those weakest links are and make it a system, we've missed it. So we're really working to have it be a system. The last thing I would say is how important are communications? We have had over 500 town hall meetings down here. And one of the things that we're doing to let an individual that owns a home in New Orleans to know what their risk is today and what it will be in June of 2011 and thereafter, that we've linked with Google Earth so that you can go onto your computer and go into the internet, and with our system as it currently is on the ground, you can zero in to your house, your address, and you can find out where your inundation level would be at various levels. What is the purpose of that? It is to transparently and openly communicate what your risk is. A lot of my people still use the word protection. I don't use it. I use the word risk reduction. At best, that's what we're going to be able to do. So I think I'll conclude there, Mr. Moderator, and just thank you for the opportunity to come talk, and I really look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you all very much.